Hello out there, and this is Jamie Hazelwood.
And I'm Tommy Sims.
And you are about to get a safety demo because there's a lot of materials that we're going to be using for this class all throughout, and you definitely need to make sure that you know how to use them properly, so that way no one's getting hurt, there isn't any sort of boo-boos or owies out there, and anything of that sort where you're cutting yourself or anything like that. So we just wanted to make a little quick review as to what to do and what not to do with some of the more dangerous tools that you will be using. Right, Tommy?
That's correct, Jamie. We just want to make sure that everybody stays safe, and safety comes first.
Safety first. So, Tommy, let's start off with some sharp edges, because you will be using, your various blades to be cutting up some certain things, getting the shapes you want. And so this is just a quick rundown. We know that you guys have a basic idea as to what to do and what not to do, but we really want to review just to be extra cautious, because you can never really be too safe, can you, Tommy?
No, you can't.
So here's a little arrangement of some of the more common sharp edges we'll be using in our lessons here. So first things first is we'll go with the one right on the left here, this little poker guy.
This little poker guy is one of our clay tools. Let me get you a better background there. Perfect. And we have this here in our safety demo because a lot of the clay tools that you'll come across have some sort of pointy edge or sharp edge, and you just want to be careful that you don't hurt yourself with them. This one is obviously made of plastic, so therefore it's going to be safer, but just a heads up, there are metal ones out there. You've seen in a few of our other demos that we do use like a metal needle point tip, and that could easily poke you and really injure you, and you just want to be safe with that. And the other end here obviously will not hurt as much, because it's completely rounded off and used for more detail. But when you're using this end, obviously where's the pointy end? Right in the palm of my hand there, and as you can see it's kind of poking in, and you just want to be careful that you don't poke yourself too hard with it, because we just don't want you to get hurt.
Right, and the one thing to keep in mind when it comes to using the little point here is that if I'm going to be pointing, sculpting something out, I want to make sure that my fingers aren't directly behind where I poke and go all the way through and then end up poking my finger, especially when it comes to be a little bit sharper of objects. So what's good is if I'm poking out for details, if I kind of have my fingers off to the side away from where it's going to be poking through. So just kind of think of where this is going to be going through and make sure that your fingers aren't in that way.
The next thing on our list here is we have a common butter knife. Yes, it is not as sharp as other knives, but it is still quite dangerous. And we have the butter knife here because we use it mostly for just cutting up clay. And we also do have another clay knife, but if you don't have an actual clay knife that comes with, say, a set of tools like this, you can easily use a butter knife or have your parents use a butter knife. So that way everybody stays safe. And when you're cutting this, you want to make sure that your fingers are not going to be directly underneath where the knife is cutting. You want it to be a little bit further away. And as you can see here, I have a tiny piece of clay, so I have to be very cautious of where my fingers are placed. And it even sometimes helps if you hold it like so with your fingernails down, so you're not cutting into your fingers, you're cutting alongside them. Your fingers stay safe and you're able to cut off your little piece of clay here.
And this is sort of a universal lesson as far as when they get sharper and sharper, such as this one right here.
Right.
Same thing, you just make sure you're not cutting with the fingers and almost have your fingernails up. And it's actually what a lot of chefs do as well when they're slicing up vegetables. So as I said, this is kind of more of a universal technique to make sure that you don't get your fingers in the way.
Right, and we mostly have this knife here just to show you sometimes this is something that we'll use in our demonstrations here just to kind of make things go faster, because sometimes clay can be a little bit harder to cut. Like, say, this brown block of clay here. We have mentioned how you can peel clay off, and you would need it to get it a lot softer. But if you're just cutting into it, and the butter knife just isn't cutting it, you can see it's kind of getting,
nice. It just
getting
ain't
stuck in there. If we take the sharper knife, it'll cut right through that, no issues, and it just helps us move our program along a lot faster. So we probably recommend that you don't use this just for safety reasons and just kind of stick with the butter knife.
Yes, because me and Tommy are trained professionals. Something you can try at home, but you definitely need to have your parents' permission for it.
Right. Always, always, always have adult supervision and be safe.
Right, and we have a metal butter knife there. So sometimes you might find some plastic ones, and those might not be as well. Those might not cut near as well. So then you can use a little bit sharper ones. So just be cautious if you're using the plastic ones. And
speaking of the back to the clay tool sets, some of them will come with knives. Some of them will. They might have a really cheap metal knife in there, but more often than not, you'll find that they come with a plastic knife, and it will have a sharper edge, but it's not really sharp enough to cut you. You just do have to be careful with it, and you will find that it doesn't cut into the hard clay all that easily, so you probably do want to maybe get a butter knife, but just be very careful when you're cutting your clay.
Right. And so that transitions us. So this is just one blade. But what happens when two of them are together? They make a scissors. So that will be the next sort of segue into our next safety portion here, is when it comes to scissors and really just cutting through. So really with the scissors as well as this little box knife here, what's the best way to cut something, Tommy?
Away from your body and away from your hands. So obviously when you're cutting a sheet of paper or something, like I've got a piece of, say, a foam sheet here that we've used in our puppets, and we can use this for set materials as well. You all definitely want to be careful of where your hand is placed underneath. And I can kind of see that my hand goes that far into the paper. So I'm not going to cut right here and then cut directly up into where my fingers are. I'm going to cut further away and just make sure that I am safe. And then obviously when you're cutting a sheet of paper or something, you're always cutting away from yourself because it's just the easiest way to do it. Now when you have something along the lines of a box cutter here, which does have certain locks on it that children can't get at all that easily, and you're able to open it up here and then the sharp blade comes out. And when you're using something like this, you have more of a free range to cut however you want in whatever shape you want. And you also just want to be careful that you're not cutting towards your hand. You want to cut either away that way or away this way. And we actually do recommend that any chance you get, use scissors. They are much safer than the box cutter. And just with the sharper knife, we kind of have the box cutter here because this helps us advance our demos along a lot faster than if we just use scissors to cut, say, this cardboard box top here. Because if you're trying to cut into it, that's quite easy and whatnot. But if I want to start and cut a hole in here, rather than poking the hole and taking the time to do that, I can just take the box cutter and just cut right in.
Now the other thing to keep in mind, though, is when it comes to cutting into the table, kind of like what he's doing here, is to always have something underneath, so that way you're not ruining all your nice little tables and all your surfaces out there.
Right, this table kind of has somewhat of a plastic cloth top, and if you kind of look down here, yep, you can see one mistake that we made earlier when we were cutting a piece of paper with the box cutter. It just sliced right through the table here.
And now the table can talk to us saying,
yep,
why did you cut us into? So now that's something that we don't necessarily want. So, like I said, we can just have something underneath when you guys are just poking right straight through. Because the other bad thing that comes with that is you might dull your knife if you're just pushing it into such hard surfaces.
Right. If you have like the box cutter or like even a small X-Acto knife, they say that these blades are only good for 3 cuts, 3 perfectly straight edge cuts. Because after cutting so many things, if you look at it under a microscope, you'll see that the blade is kind of all like nicked up and whatnot. You can't see it with the naked eye, but it's definitely there, and it just really dulls the blade over time.
And the worst part about your blade dulling is that it becomes a lot more difficult to cut things up. So then you might strain yourself a little bit more and thus get yourself into a dangerous situation because you're trying so hard to cut something.
Right. So when you're using all these materials, obviously use normal classroom scissors. Like these are even more heavy-duty scissors that can also double as pliers or even what looks to be a bottle opener and whatnot in a way. So just use safer materials. We just have these things here to advance the demos much, much quicker.
Excellent. And the segue to go into the next one is this little piece of cardboard that Tommy has here.
Right. So what I've got sitting on it, move the camera over here, is our handy-dandy hot glue gun.
Hot tamale.
Very, very hot. So our little segue here with the cardboard is always have something underneath the hot glue gun, because as you can see, when you turn it on, some of the hot glue guns have this option for a high temperature or a low temperature. More often than not, Jamie and I will keep it on the high temperature just to keep the glue very warm and fluid, because the hot glue itself starts off as little sticks like this, and then they have to warm up inside of here, and then it'll come out the tip.
And don't mistaken that low setting for something that's not near as hot. That's still something that you definitely don't want to be touching.
Right, so this should really read hot and extremely hot.
Yes, exactly. Either way, it's going to be a little bit dangerous. So there are alternatives such as tacky glue and like plumber epoxy type of things. Those help out as far as it has a stronger bond than your normal Elmer's glue, because that's the big advantage of the hot glue, is it's able to get that instant bond. But if you are going to use the hot glue, what are the parts that these kids should not be touching, Tommy?
Nobody should touch anything above the handle, really. Your hand should only be down here, and then you just insert the glue in the top up here. And really, don't touch anything else. You can move this back if your hot glue gun does have it, and that just helps it stand up. And then you obviously, when you're gluing something, this more so comes in handy when you're making puppets or sock puppets. You don't want to glue right on top of your hand if your hand is inside of the puppet. Or say, if you're folding something, you want to make sure that it's thick enough that the glue just won't seep through and burn your hand right away. If you can, keep your fingers away from where you're gluing. Just kind of glue the edge there. And certain materials, you'll notice, will have somewhat of a chemical reaction with the hot glue. This foam here, you can see within the glue, it does, it's a little bit difficult for you guys to see, but it does kind of bubble up inside of there. And certain foams will bubble up with the hot glue, and it'll just make the foam incredibly hot as well. But back to the cardboard, we have it underneath here, because if you just let your hot glue gun sit, the glue will slowly start to ooze out of the tip there and just pile up on whatever is directly underneath that. And we don't want that to be your kitchen table or wherever you're doing these projects. Have a sheet of paper or a piece of cardboard or something. They even make rubber sheets specifically for hot glue guns to be set up on. And some hot glue guns, we've discovered, are even sold with a base that the gun itself locks into, and then it'll pile up. It'll have a spot for the glue to pile up underneath it.
Right. And it'll just instantly start heating up right when you plug it in, so it isn't something where you can plug it in and not worry about it dripping because you haven't turned it on or anything of that sort.
Right. And once again, this is not an on-off switch. This just kind of allows you to choose the temperature that the glue is warming up at.
Excellent, excellent. So, in review, with the sharp edges, do not cut towards you. And with the hot glue here, just make sure you have something to kind of catch it, and don't touch anywhere around here, because there's even stickers that say caution hot. We know you guys are smart guys, but we just want to make sure. So, in conclusion, safety first, right,
Yep.
Tommy?
We do have a few more things, really quick.
And what's that, Tommy?
This up here, our clay.
Oh, yes, because now that we have all of our materials, or now that we've discussed how we do all these materials, what do we do? This will be part of the, I would say, the care portion.
Right. I mean, it's still kind of safety. Yes, like yes, the clay is non-toxic and whatnot, but it is not. It's not exactly like Play-Doh. So little kids shouldn't really be using this stuff. And when playing with this compared to Play-Doh, you'll notice certain colors, such as the red here, will get off on your fingers. You can see on my pointer finger here is like completely red. Now, you don't just want to throw the clay aside and go play with something else, because then other things, you'll see it comes off on the paper there. Everything in your household will turn the color of the clay. So what you want to do is take some paper towel and just always have that handy to wipe off first.
Yeah, soap and a little water goes a long way with a lot of these things.
Right. So be sure to clean that off. And then also, you don't want to be careless and just leave your clay laying on top of a sheet of paper, because what will happen is the pigment of the clay will be picked up on the paper. It's a little bit difficult to see there. Let's go to a spot that's had clay sitting on it for quite some time now. This green has been here for a while, and if I move it, you can kind of see that there's some little oil spots there. You can see some more up here from where clay has been sitting before.
Yes, and that's something that, especially when it comes to your guys' awesome sets that you'll be building, it would be easy to leave all your materials there next to your set, but at the same time, you're going to be leaving some unintentional grease marks and stuff like that, oil marks that are on there that you definitely don't want to be part of your set.
Right, so the paper itself is very porous and will soak up the oil of the clay, and it'll leave a stain on the paper and then also slowly dry out your clay over time. So what you want to do, if you have any leftover clay and you still have the package that it came in, keep it in the package as much as you can, and you can store the clay right back in the package, and you can kind of wrap it up, and you could even tape that shut if you wanted to make sure air really doesn't get at it, because air kind of does dry out the clay over time as well. And you just have to knead the clay again to get it softer, but this does help keep the moisture in. And if you throw out the wrappers afterwards, just take some plastic baggies and throw the clay in the baggie, wrap it up, and you can just set it aside. Or take some of these plastic containers with a lid on it, and you can store your clay in there as well, and it'll keep it nice and moist.
The Tupperware also helps too as far as you guys' characters, because if you guys have a few characters that you've built too, and you don't want them to get exposed to a whole lot of air, you don't want them to dry out too well, the Tupperware is really good, because then you can label it to make sure that these are where your characters are, so that way they're nice in a convenient spot, not all over the place. But the one thing to keep in mind, though, is if you use the Tupperwares for storing anything, you definitely want to wash it out before you start putting some of your awesome leftover food or anything like that in there, because the same concept with the clay being on the paper, it leaves a little grease mark. You might not see it as much on that clear plastic, but it'll definitely leave some of the clay residue in that Tupperware as well. So
right, or even if you want to be totally dedicated, just completely dedicate this one Tupperware for clay from now on and no longer put food inside of here.
So yes, so now that we have our safety and then we have the care towards it, because the materials, these are what you guys are going to be making your awesome movies on. These are what your actors and all your sets will be, so you want to make sure they have the same amount of care as you'll be putting through with that whole set and the story that's going to be coming out. So
I think one more thing that we've forgotten to mention before we wrap up here is always keep your sharp objects and hot glue guns and any materials off the edge of the table, because you don't want to accidentally bump it and knock, say, the sharp knife off the edge of the table and accidentally hurt yourself with it, or even the hot glue gun and burn your foot. So just use as much precaution as you can.
Right, and in the off chance you guys maybe get a little bit of hot glue on you, it's easy remedy of just running some cold water over there and just kind of keeping an eye on it.
Cold water and ice.
Mm-hmm. So, we hope you guys never run into that problem, but especially after watching these demos, then that really shouldn't happen, right, Tommy?
That's right, Jamie.
Although accidents happen, so don't be too discouraged. So, until next time, guys.
Stay safe!